This DIY is for my Silent Hill fans out there. First of all, we have to select which doll is going to work best for the character. We're making Pyramid Head, so we're going to want a doll that is taller and a bit thinner. This one should work fantastic. So we're going to start by taking off the clothing, and I always save it in case I want to use it for something else later. I have a big bag full of clothes that I've taken off of dolls. The boots on this doll are especially nice, so I'm definitely going to keep those for later. Next, we're going to take the bow out of the hair. A lot of times they're just held in with a piece of thread. So once I snip that out, then I'm going to start looking at where to remove the hair. Generally, they're glued on, so I'm going to gently just pull the glue up. And since they're generally old, the glue is cracked and just generally pops right off. You'll pull that skull cap off, and then generally they just snap right back on. So now I need to see about where it stands in the doll stand and take some measurements of the face so I can get an idea of how tall I want this mask to be. I didn't care for the measurements of the first one. It just wasn't quite big enough. So as you can see here, I am tracing out another one, a little bit larger. You definitely want to use a ruler because you want everything to be symmetrical. I'll just kind of mark little dots here, and that helps guide where my measurements are. And you're going to wind up painting over it anyways, so it doesn't really matter if you have markings all over. So as I finish that up, I'm going to pull out my wood burner, or my miniature hot knife as I like to call it. I'm going to get it heated up, and then once it's hot, I'm going to start cutting through the foam. Now remember that this is going to burn anything that's underneath it, so if you're doing this on a table, make sure you have something down that's protective. I cut it out all the way around, and then in the center lines, I'm just going to cut through enough that they're bendy, but I don't want to go all the way through. Then I'm going to check my measurements and make sure that, yep, it looks like I want it to. And then next, I'm going to take the measurements for the back of the headpiece. Now, as you'll see for this, I'm going to make the markings on the bottom a little bit further out because I want the bottom of the mask to flare out a bit in the back. See how I'm using the ruler to mark the outer distance? And then I'm going to start connecting my marks and my dots. Again, this is how I keep everything so symmetrical because you definitely want to make sure that your measurements are correct. Otherwise, your mask is going to come out all wonky. My measurement here was just a tad off. That's why I had to flip the ruler around a couple times because I had to make sure that I adjusted it correctly so that my measurements were where they were supposed to be. Then you're going to take that hot knife again and you're going to make your cuts all the way through on the outside and on the inside, just halfway through because you just want it bendy. Now, you don't have to have one of these to do this. You can always cut it with a razor. I just like this because it's a bit easier for me. Again, remember that whatever you're doing this on, if you're going all the way through on the outside, you're going to burn on the bottom. So make sure you have something protective down and watch your hands. I have definitely burned the crap out of myself before with this. Now, before I cut those middle pieces up, I had to trim on the outside a bit here. This foam board I bought at the Dollar Tree. And so the paper part on the outside I had to trim up a bit. The foam on the inside cuts real nice, but it melts. And so sometimes you have a little bit of that overhang from that paper part. So there you have it, you see. We're keeping it that way so that it's bendy, but not all the way through. Now I'm measuring them up together. Yeah, they look pretty good to me. They line up correctly, so that's a bonus. Then I'm going to cut a piece out for his machete. Now, I'll be honest, this piece that I cut out, I wound up redoing because I didn't like the way this one looked. Anyhow, when I put both ends up to the doll's head, I noticed that I needed just a bit more. So I cut a couple little pieces of that foam off and I attached them. We'll call them expanders. And I hot glued them on and then I glued all the pieces together. And that's what's going to form that pyramid head helmet. Make sure you hold it all in place so that all the edges dry correctly where they need to be. Then after it's dry, I'm going to take it and try and place it on my doll's face and just make sure that, yes, indeed, everything does fit well. And then I'm adding some extra glue reinforcements just to make sure that it's extra strong. Once that's done, then it's time to start adding the embellishments to it. So I took some zip ties and I snipped off the cubes. I did that to several of them because we're going to use those to line the entire pyramid head mask. I think in total I probably snipped the heads off of about, probably 10 or 12 of them. Once I get all of that done, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start gluing all of those strips along the edges. So I'm going to start gluing them down and outlining the outside here, as you can see. Now, I took the little pointy end of the zip tie and I had that down towards the bottom to help make my tip. And then in the middle, I'm going to put 2 zip ties right next to each other to make it a little bit of a thicker surface. And again, I'm going to use the pointy part of that zip tie to go down towards the bottom to help make my tip. Then I'll repeat the same process for the top. Then you want some sort of a mesh material, screen or something like that. I used burlap. And I'm going to frame them with zip ties. Same process, just hot gluing them around the corners. If you have a little overhang, that's fine. You can just snip it off. But you're going to want to do that for 2 of them. And you need to make sure that they mirror each other. That's very important. These pack of zip ties came from the Dollar Tree as well. Honestly, zip ties are great craft tools. I use them in all sorts of things. This part is a little bit more of a tedious process because you have to make sure that they're both even and that they both mirror each other because they're going to go on each side. And if one of them is off, it's going to make the whole thing look wonky. Eventually, when you do go to attach them, that little framed part is going to be on the outside, if you hadn't guessed that already. And as I hold it up to measure it, yep, looks like it's going to work great. Once I finish that up, I need to add grommets. Now, he's got these 4 grommets on his mask, 2 on each side. I happen to have a container of assorted eyes, and that's what I'm doing. I'm just snipping off the back of them. I'm going to hold things up a bit here and do some measurements, and then I'm going to start attaching those. You're going to put 2 on each side. I'm honestly amazed that I didn't burn myself with the glue gun this time. With the placement, you're going to do 2 at the top and then 2 a little bit down. But also make sure that it doesn't interfere with where you're going to place your little framed mesh pieces. Once those are nice and glued down, then you're going to take this mask piece on those 2 mesh pieces and the machete, and you're going to spray paint them. I use a base coat of nutmeg. And then to get that kind of copper pipe rusted look, I'm going to use this hammered color. Now, you don't have to use spray paint. You could use craft paint if you wanted to. I just prefer spray paint. Now, I happen to have a lot of craft supplies that most people don't. But there are other things that you can use to dupe them. I'm using latex, liquid latex, and I'm going to coat this doll. I want it to have a flesh-like look and feel. You can totally use a flesh-colored spray paint or even a craft paint if you wanted to. You don't have to use latex. It's honestly your personal preference. So I'm going to coat all of the area covered in cloth. And then where the porcelain part meets the cloth part, I'm going to do a little trick here so that it kind of works as a patch to combine the 2. I'm just going to take some paper towel. I'm going to separate the sheet into 2 pieces, and then I'm going to wrap the arm area and I'm going to coat it in some more of that latex. It dissolves the seam. I'm not really so much worried about doing it for the legs because you're not going to see that part. It's going to be covered by his apron. So once it's all coated, then I'm going to set it aside and I'm going to let it dry. Then I'm going to take a piece of material. Just plain white material is fine. Honestly, any scrap material is fine. You will have pre-measured it so that you make sure you have the right length already cut out. I'm covering the apron in latex because I want it to look like skin. His apron is actually made out of skin. So I'm going to start rubbing the latex all over. I want to make sure every part of it is covered. Something that is important when working with latex is to make sure that you have something down underneath it and that you're wearing clothes that you don't care about. If you get it on your clothes, I'm sorry, it's not coming out. I use parchment a lot when I'm doing crafts because it's easy for cleanup. When I'm done, I can just wrinkle it up and toss it. And so I'm spreading it out on parchment here. And then behind me, which you can't see, I have a whole drop cloth. I have a velvet sofa, so I would lose my mind if I actually got latex or paint on it. So as I cover it, all the edges and whatnot, I'm going to go back in and pour a little bit more on top of it because I really want to make sure that it's nice and thick because I really want to give it that skin look. So as you can see, this is my very first YouTube video. And I plan to do a lot more with some really cool things that I make. Of course, feel free to ask any questions that you might have in the comments. Now, latex dries rather quickly, so as you put the fresh latex down, make sure that you're swiping fast. So at this point, I think maybe it took maybe 5 or 6 minutes for it to dry. And then I took it out and I painted it. I used some nutmeg to give it a dirty look under the neck and the armpits. I used a light dusting of flat black to cast some shadow, a tad bit of some metallic gold for highlights. And then I used this red as blood splatter, not only on the apron, but also on the machete. All right, so once everything is painted, then we're gonna go inside and we're gonna get ready to attach our screen pieces. Now, you want to be able to see that darkness underneath it, so I just cut a little piece of black material out and I hot glued it right to the back of it. It's gonna give it more depth and make it pop out a bit more. Then once I have the backs hot glued on, then I'm going to go ahead and take them and determine where I want to place them. Once I figure that out, then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take my hot glue and I'm going to go around the back of them there with a little bit of hot glue. And I'm going to stick those suckers right on. Remember that when you're attaching them, you want them to mirror each other. Once I have them both glued on, then I'm going to go ahead, take one last look at it, make sure it looks good, and then I'm going to set it aside. Then I'm going to grab that skin apron. I'm going to just hold it up again here and make sure that I did have the measurements right. Everything looks good, and so now it's time to attach it. You're going to want to go high up on the neck with it. And then you're going to want to glue in the wrinkles in place because you want to make sure that it has that wrinkled look. So make your crease and then hot glue, lift it up, hot glue, make your crease all the way down the torso to about the hips. Then you're going to flip it over and it's time to start attaching it in the sides and the back. Now, I like to use those needle nose pliers. They really help me a lot. They prevent me from getting burned a lot of the time. You're just going to kind of have to play with it a bit and make sure that you have it lined up the way that you want it. I finally decided that's where I wanted it to sit at, added a couple more wrinkles in it because you have to remember it's skin, so it's going to be creased. Grab another glue stick, and then I start gluing the other flap over, and then I'm going to go ahead and glue the seam all the way down. Again, using those needle nose pliers to prevent myself from having craft scars. And the great thing is, once the glue dries, you can just pick the little hardened piece of glue right off the pliers. It doesn't do any damage. Now, I didn't have the camera in frame for you to see, but down at the bottom, I'm just making sure that everything is even at the bottom. And when I decide I like the way everything looks, then I pick it up and I'm making sure that everything is secured all the way around. As you can see, I'm adding a little bit of glue in the back and then again up in the sides and using those needle nose pliers to press it all down. Making sure that you definitely get up inside the armpit as well. I just keep adding glue and pressing down in the areas that I need to make sure that everything is sealed all the way around and everything is stuck well. Going back up to the top and gluing down those points on the top of the apron over the shoulders. So far looks good, but not done yet. But now it's time to really take a look and start adding the details that make it look extra real. I kind of have an idea of where I'm going to glue that helmet down to when I'm ready. I'll turn it towards the camera so you can get a good look at it. Looks pretty good so far. Remember, I did cut out a different machete than the one that you're seeing there. Next, going on to the back piece, I'm just going to take a piece of white material and I went out and I spray painted it with that nutmeg. And then I'm going to take some zip ties that I have also sprayed and I'm going to make the back piece. I sprayed those zip ties with that hammered color and then I'm going to glue them down in an X. Once they're dried in position, then I'm going to snip off the extra. This just adds a bit extra. That way it looks great from all different directions. So if you're looking at it from the back, it looks equally as detailed as looking at it from the front. I also am going to add an upper and lower apron tie. Remember those socks that were on with the boots? Well, I took those off, cut the toes out, painted them. And now we have, I guess you'd call those gauntlets. And then I snipped a little piece off that dress and I painted it and made upper and lower apron ties. All the extra little details just help it to look more complete. Obviously, you don't want to go overboard, but if you think about it, you're definitely going to have apron ties with an apron. I went ahead here and I spray painted a flat block around there to cast that shadow so that when the helmet's on, it looks like there's a shadow underneath it. I'm happy with the way it looks, so I'm going to go ahead and attach the helmet and the machete, and there you have it. Pyramid Head from Silent Hill. There's a little bit more up close of how that machete looks, and a good side view. This probably cost me $10 worth of supplies, and that includes the doll itself. It honestly is amazing what you can do with scraps, things you get from the dollar store, and things that you get from the thrift shop or yard sales. Anyhow, I hope that you enjoyed my very first YouTube video. Make sure that you subscribe.